Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist, and it's that time of the year again. As always, this list is a way for me to look back at my readings from 2021 and try and assess which of the books I read in the course of the year resonated the most with me and had more of an impact on my imagination, my thoughts, my understanding of the world, literature, everything in between. As always, it's not really a way of pitching the books against one another or stating that one book is better than another, because what even is that? I'm also not counting rereadings, because otherwise the same 2 or 3 books would top the list every year, and where would be the fun in that? All of these are great books that I would recommend to all of you. I have filmed reviews for most of these books, and there are links in the description box to my review of each of these books if I've filmed one. There is also a link to a full list, a full ranking of all the fiction books I've read in 2021, because that's the kind of person I am. That post is available on my Patreon page, and definitely I wanted to take a moment to thank my patrons for supporting me throughout the year, and thank you guys for watching my videos for yet another year. It's always awesome to discuss books with you in the comments to the videos. I always enjoy all the conversations we have and all the recommendations you share. Number 20 is The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner, a beautiful novel about how easily a human being and a human life can slide off the tracks. A very important theme for a novel that is concerned with talking about prison life and about the dehumanizing and inhumane aspects of the prison system. At 19 is The Autumn of the Patriarch by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a wonderfully rambling treatise on an archetypal, legendary tyrant, and a book that shows very persuasively how men of evil have to be brutal, but not necessarily have to be brilliant, and how evil men, for all of their cunning, are often also stupid and pathetic. The Patriarch in this sense is a devilish and horrifying figure, but he is also pathetic and often hilariously so, and there's something truly liberating and empowering in being able to laugh at power, at evil men, in the way that Marquez teaches us throughout this novel. Next, 2 very dark novels, the Copenhagen trilogy by Tove Ditlevsen and Norwegian Wood by Murakami. The Copenhagen trilogy deals very lucidly, almost cruelly, with family relationships, with codependency, with addiction, with emotional turmoil, and it would be an almost excoriatingly painful read if it weren't for the narrator's very, very pure, very liberating and luminous love of language, of wordplay, of stories and poems, which acts as a salvific force throughout the entire book and is always perceivable as a source of good. Norwegian Wood touches very delicately on how death and mourning can shape a young life. As I've mentioned in my review of the novel, I don't think it's an unproblematic novel, but it is definitely very engaging and very compelling, and as I said, it touches upon some very difficult themes in a rather careful and very enlightening way. The next 2 books impress me because of the scope of their world building. Number 16 is Possession by A.S. Byatt, a novel that's stunning in how beautifully it creates not only the biography but the entire oeuvre of 2 fictional Victorian poets. It's really engaged in the acrobatics of its intricate plots and enigmas, and it definitely has a lot to say about the nature of reading, and especially the nature of criticism, the ways we look at authors and we analyze their lives and their works. For this reason, it's absolutely recommended to the literature students, the literature scholars, or even just the book nerds among you. 15 is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, a novel that creates an entire world with separate cultures and nations, traditions, deities, systems of power and politics, and does so completely effortlessly, without indulging in descriptions or needless exposition, and without ever stopping the action for a moment. It's a brilliant fantasy novel, and there's a lot of queens with swords fighting dragons off the top of castle towers in here, which is always excellent, but what I really appreciated about The Priory is the way it imagines a world that's entirely disconnected from the patriarchal, male-line descendant systems of power that have ruled throughout most of Western society throughout history and whose consequences are still shaping our societies and our cultures in very perceivable ways in today's world. One of the highest callings of literature is trying to imagine a better world than the one we're living in, and The Priory of the Orange Tree definitely answered to that calling. The next two, strangely enough, are kind of the same book, Howard's End by E.M. Foster and On Beauty by Zadie Smith. On Beauty pays direct and explicit homage to Howard's End and reimagines many of its plot lines and themes within the context of the 21st century. Both are stories about very different characters brought together by very peculiar circumstances who struggle to understand each other's worldviews and struggle to navigate each other's limited understandings of their own emotions, their own needs, their own responsibilities, and their own priorities. Even more memorably though, these are stories where characters of a more liberal bent and more conservative characters clash with one another, but they don't clash quite as violently as you would expect them to. These are stories that raise many important and sometimes uncomfortable questions about the nature of culture, the nature of liberal thought as opposed to traditional thought. Possibly the overarching question that ties the two together is how truly and how deeply can privileged liberal people really understand the underprivileged that they supposedly champion? Is there some or a lot of hypocrisy in the way they live their lives, in the beliefs that they hold up? How can we embrace these progressive ideals without falling into these pitfalls, without being hypocrites, but by truly connecting with our fellow human beings? At 12 is Gli Indifferenti by Alberto Moravia, a novel that shocked me with the depths of its perception and that reminded me a lot of one of my favorite books from 2020, which is Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann. Both of these books were written by their author when they were very young. I think Moravia was still a teenager when he started writing The Indifferenti. Like Buddenbrooks, this is an indictment of the self-absorption, hypocrisy, vileness and pettiness of a bourgeois family, although Gli Indifferenti is actually much more nightmarish in exploring the perversions of the thought processes and the vices that cause this family to keep up this facade of morality and luxury even in the face of their terrible, horrifying decay and the great boredom that turns their life into this empty succession of pointless acts. A horrifying novel, horribly perceptive. I'm not sure how easy it is to find an English copy, but if you can read Italian, by all means you should read The Indifferenti. Next are two novels that surprise me with their ambitiousness. At 11 is East of Eden by John Steinbeck, a novel that feels very much like Steinbeck was going all out. He was trying to wrap his every thought about the nature of his home country, about the nature of the human spirit, of good and evil, into one single story structured around 2 or 3 families. Nova by Samuel Delany is number 10, a novel that is pure linguistic fireworks and that stretched my understanding not just of what the potential of science fiction is, but what the potential of the English language really is. This book is constant movement, constant invention, constant action, and it contains some truly insightful reflections on the nature of history and historiography, on the nature of economics and politics and literature, which are all at the end of the day, different facets of the same basic human concern. Number 9 is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, a book that is every bit as nightmarish as The Handmaid's Tale. This is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, but which is also a testament, truly, to the good as much as the evil that can reside in the human heart. It's an invigorating and stimulating book, and as far as adventures go, this was by far the most engaging and engrossing adventure book that I've read all year. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, number 8, was a huge surprise, so very different from Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but truly engaging, truly stimulating and captivating, and frankly quite touching. Its final line in particular has stayed with me ever since I read it, as has the brilliancy of its unique narrator. Emma was another massive surprise, a book that completely rocked my understanding of what Jane Austen's fiction even is about, and that really captivated me in the world of its heroine. Rarely have I found characters who are crafted with this degree of precision and carefulness, and it's truly stunning in the web of prejudices and misconceptions that is stretched across the world of the novel, and that makes this at once a truly engaging story but also a very stimulating narrative game. Number 6 is The Sea by Iris Murdoch. I wish all my novels came with a sea monster on page 3, and I wish they all dealt with characters who are so complex and so flawed and frayed in their psyche, in their conceptions of themselves, in a manner that is as ruthless and as honest, brutally honest, as the manner in which Murdoch deals with her narrator/protagonist in The Sea. Entering the top 5 now, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson is a uniquely sinister, uniquely fascinating novel that almost reads like a fairy tale, in that it's almost an archetype of the kind of evil and sinister undercurrents that underpin all types of human relationships. Even beyond the immediate circumstances of its characters, it feels like this book has taken roots in my imagination for good, in the same way as an archetypal fairy tale does when we encounter it as children. Number 4 is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, the novel that does what any other novel does, but better and larger. All but inimitable in the scope of its reflections on the nature of history and destiny and free will, and in the honesty of its insight into the minds and the emotions of its characters. Number 3, The Buddha of Suburbia by Hanif Kureishi was the funniest book I've read this year. It was hilarious in the same way as Jonathan Coe's novels or Zadie Smith's novels can also be hilarious. But at the same time, a book that deals with this degree of honesty on matters of sexual awakening, familial relationships, class, ambitiousness, soured emotions, conflicting friendships, on such difficult and personal matters, cannot help also being inherently sad. This is a book about the contradictions experienced by anybody, by any young person who wishes to leave behind their humble origins and make it in the dazzling artistic world of the big city. There's lots of heartbreak in here, but also lots of strange and hilarious adventures, and a great capacity for laughing at much of life's sorrow without dismissing it, but by embracing it wholeheartedly. Number 2 is La Storia by Elsa Morante. I said that War and Peace is all but inimitable, because in fact La Storia feels very much like War and Peace to me, with its capacity for embracing the movements of history, of its tradition of oppression and suffering, while also being able to tackle the intricacies of the psyche and the complexity of the suffering of its protagonists. It is tempting to describe La Storia almost as a War and Peace updated for the 21st century, a War and Peace that comes to grips with the horrors of the genocides and wars of the 21st century. But this almost feels reductive, because it pushes Morante in the shadow of Tolstoy. In fact, Morante's novel is actually unique in how it can portray the small joys that can be had even in the bleakest moments of recent history. The small joys of motherhood, of a laugh shared among family members, of listening to the songs of the birds in a wood. It's unique in creating these moments and pitching them against the bleakest horrors of recent history. without making these moments appear pathetic and without shattering their beauty, but preserving them as redemptive moments in an otherwise brutal and oppressive history. Number one, my favorite book from last year was Baudolino by Umberto Eco. This is one of those rare books that feel like they're written explicitly for me. Not only does it deal with the history of my native neck of the woods, call it northwestern Italy, but it deals with history, more broadly speaking, in a tone that is at once learned, but also constantly stupefied, constantly surprised at the wondrous scope and daring of human deeds, but also the pitfalls of human pettiness and hate and self-interest. It's a novel that uses fantasy. It's first and foremost a fantasy novel, not to escape history, but to make sense of it and to make it understandable. In this, it reminded me very closely of Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon, another masterpiece of, call it, fantastical historical fiction. Baudolino is a fantasy adventure of immense ingenuity, but it's also hilarious, accessible, and truly stunning in how deeply human all of its many characters are, with their dreams and their wishes and their flaws. That's it for my favorite books from last year. As I said, these were just a few snippets, a few simple reasons why I like them so much, but do feel free to check out the description box for fuller, longer reviews on many of these books, and I really look forward to hearing from you in the description box about your favorite reads from last year. Thank you as always for watching my videos throughout 2021. I hope you're all doing okay. I hope you're all keeping safe. Thank you again to my patrons for supporting the channel. Read nice books throughout next year too, and have fun. Bye everybody.